see right in front of you is a chapel, which goes back several centuries, and that's on an island. So there's water all around that island, and between that and the museum and the castle that's on top of that rock in the background is lake. And this is because this is the only picture that you will see of Bled. I just describe it a little bit before I get into the main part of my presentation. Bled is a world-class resort. It's just an absolutely beautiful place. Up the road, about 10 miles from there, is a place called Bohinj, Bohinj, which is an equally beautiful lake. It's not as well developed and it's not quite as spectacular as Bled is, but the mountains are higher and it's really a treat to visit there as well. So this is a place that if you're going to go to Slovenia, you don't want to miss it. It's not the only place you want to go, but this is certainly a key place. The last time I was at Bled was with Dart's cousin and her husband, Chuck and Sherry Carrion from Albuquerque. And they met my friend Gregor Zare, whom, if you haven't met him in person, you will meet him tonight in the presentation. We went there and we had a gondolier, so to speak, pushed about 7 of us across the lake from Bled out to that chapel and up the 99 steps that lead up to the chapel. And 50 years ago, just about 50 years ago, my friend Gregor and I were skating on Lake Bled when it was black ice. There was no snow, but it was bitter cold, but it was absolutely beautiful. It was just like this picture, only the water was ice and it was just fantastic. So enough on Lake Bled. It was fine. As advertised, I'm going to give you a short guide to the beauty and charm of Slovenia. Have any of you been to Slovenia?
Yes.
Who's that?
Brad, I've been to Ljubljana, passing through.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So, so there's one person I can't tell lies to about Ljubljana anyway.
I have no memory.
Yeah. Okay.
More than 15 years.
So let's get started. I have about 40 minutes worth of slides, and Susan and I suggested that maybe the best thing to do would be to stop. I'll stop every once in a while and ask if there are any questions, and there will be time at the end as well. I admit that I'm covering a lot of different topics. We could go into more depth with almost any of them, except I can't go very far with the facts because I only know what I know. And there's a lot of things I don't know, but I spoke to my friend Gregor earlier this week, and he gave me some added ammunition in places where I thought that I might be weak. So let's get started. The overview to this tour is, first of all, where Slovenia is, what the size and demographics are, comparing it to Vermont and some other places. It is now a nation. 30 years ago, it became a nation as opposed to just a republic of the Yugoslav Federation. I'm going to give a very brief history, hitting about 3 or 4 points, starting about 5,000 years ago and ending up today. So that'll be very quick. I'll say a few words about why I was in Slovenia, what I did, and if we want to follow up on that later, we can. And then I'm going to take you on a tour of some of the notable attractions. One of them being Ljubljana, which is the capital of Slovenia, beautiful city, beautiful modern European city, as it turns out, but also to some of the places around the countryside, and of course leave time for some questions and comments. Where is Slovenia? Well, if you can picture Austria, Hungary, Croatia, and Italy, and let me, if I get a pointer here, Trieste is right about here, and over here is where Venice is. And so that portrays it. And now I have another slide here which gets you a little closer in, if I can get my, hang on. I'm right-handed when I should be left-handed. This is more of a close-up there, and you can see there's a little tongue of Italy that comes down on the left-hand side of the western side of Slovenia. We are going to go up, one of my series of slides will go up the Slovene side of that tongue, on a trip that my friend Gregor and I took. This slide also portrays some of the northern Dalmatian islands, which are beautiful in and of themselves, worth a trip. And if you could go down further, you'd come to Split and Dubrovnik, which are amazing cities to visit, and something that's really worthwhile. I'm not going to touch those on this particular tour. Give some information about size and demographics, because it always helps to have some idea of the scale. Slovenia is about the size of Wales, which means it's slightly smaller than the area of Vermont. Okay, so that gives you one thing about it. I would say something else about the size. If you took Wales and Slovenia and put them together, you would get Switzerland. And if you took Switzerland and added Wales and Slovenia, you'd get the state of Maine. Okay, you get a sense of how small these places are. Switzerland is only 1/2 the size of Maine. However, Slovenia has 2 million people, and it's a rural country, and you'll be convinced of that when I get through the slides. As you see down below, there are 250,000 people or more in the Ljubljana region, and this is one size of a community that we don't have many equivalents in the United States. The closest one I could find is Buffalo, New York. And so Ljubljana is about the size of Buffalo. It's the capital of Slovenia. It's a university town, and it's really a modern European city now. It's a really beautiful city, as you'll find out. And somebody pointed out to me that if you were in Venice and you had 2.5 hours to drive east, you'd be in Ljubljana. So it's that close if you happen to be there. Now I'm going to give you a shot of what it looks like in some of the places we're going to visit on this tour. The light green represents Slovenia. To the right over here, Zagreb. Zagreb is the capital of Croatia, which is a similar nation now. Over in the Adriatic, I'm going to show you a couple of slides down in Koper and Piran, which are on the Adriatic Sea, which is part of Slovenia. At the same time that Mount Triglav, which is a very high mountain, and the range here is also in Slovenia. So it goes up to about 10,000 feet, and it goes to sea level and everything in between. I'm going to show you some slides going up the Socha Valley here, which is on the Italian border, basically. Here's Lake Bled up here in the northwest. Maribor on the right here is the second largest city in the country. I don't have many slides of it because I never lived there or spent much time. But I will show you a B&B that's north of there in a vineyard area. Odachets is a place that's a wonderful little, it's actually an island. We'll have a picture of that. The Barrier is a marshland south of Ljubljana, and I'm going to start there in a minute. Lipica, we'll talk about a little bit later. And if it should turn out that Dina Danielson can join us, her great-grandparents came from Dragatush on the bottom of the screen. So I put that on just in case she has joined us tonight. So we're going to make that trip, and put your seatbelts on, if I can get this thing over here. Okay, now I want to talk about the brief history, and this is really brief. To the south of Ljubljana is a marshland called the Ljubljana Barrier. And pile dwellings going back 5,000 years have been the residue from the pine dwellings have been found there recently, that they had pine dwellings in that area, which is a very marshy area. And they also had found the oldest wooden wheel and axle in the world was found there. We'll see a picture of that in a minute. I'll just say that the pile dwellings have been recognized by UNESCO since 2011, and most of the pile dwellings that are included in the so-called Alpine series of pile dwellings were in Switzerland. And so they have been recognized by UNESCO as well. We'll see a picture of what one might have looked like. We're going to look at Roman times. Slovenia was in the Roman Empire one time, and there were some ruins there that we'll see. And the Middle Ages in that area had Slovenia, most of Slovenia was under the Habsburg group, and so certainly in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which had a great influence on everything from food to culture to architecture in Slovenia, and particularly in Ljubljana. And also we'll talk about the end of World War One, actually the beginning of World War One, which led to the Versailles Agreement treaty afterwards, which formally created Yugoslavia. There was no Yugoslavia before that. There were a variety of things that nation states in that particular area, but Yugoslavia itself was created in 1919. Moving along, I've got another slide here on the history. In World War II, as you probably know, Yugoslavia, especially the time that I was there, was a socialist country. I want to make a differentiation between socialist and communist. Socialism would be a style of government, let's put it that way, and communism in places where a socialist country was run basically by the Communist Party, that would be a communist regime, but it would be the Communist Party. After World War II, Tito broke with Stalin. And that really put something into the heart of Stalin, because the Soviets had long wanted to have a direct route from the Soviet Union to the Mediterranean, what they called warm waters. And because Tito, and after the war, had established the federation and changed it to a socialist state. At first, it was a communist state, and it was a communist state, but it was a communist break with the communists of Stalin. And so Tito established his own form of socialism. There were 7% of the people when I was there that were communists, but it was basically a socialist state. And it was run not necessarily by nationalized industries and some cooperatives, but it was basically worker self-management, which many people have not heard of. But basically, it was to say, if you had a restaurant, or if you had a farm, or if you had a small company, you were allowed to have up to 10 individuals working for you, and you could still be a private firm. More than that required you to have a workers management team, and the workers had self-management. The workers essentially hired the managers. There was sort of a reverse flow here. So that's the nod towards socialism. The same thing applied in the local communes or counties, if you will. The period between World War II and the breakup of the Federation of Yugoslavia in the late 1980s, in the middle of that was the time that I spent my time in Slovenia. And as I say, the worker self-management was a very important experiment at that time. Slovenia eventually was welcomed into the EU. It adopted the euro, so it's on the euro standard in 2007. And because they have a rotating leadership in the EU, Slovenia has already had 2 chances to lead the EU for a year at a time. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the history and take you down to the Barrier, which is the marshland south of Ljubljana. And this was where they found 2 sites of the alpine pine dwellings and became a UNESCO site. This next slide is what those pile dwellings may have looked like. And this was probably one that was reconstructed in Switzerland, but it was, they found 1,000 logs in Slovenia, and archaeologists were able to figure out how they put together, and they came up with what this might have looked like. And this is going back at least 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, in 5,000 BC and BCE. In addition, in this general area, archaeologists found the world's oldest known wooden wheel, which is made out of ash and oak. We have a part of it here, and this is the axle. And this basically was like a wheelbarrow. It's a 2-wheel thing that people carry around like a wheelbarrow. And that's in a museum down in that area. I mentioned the Roman remains. This was about the time I was there, living there, that they were doing some construction in the city of Ljubljana, in the southern side of Ljubljana. And when they dug down, they uncovered the ruins from what the civilization was there in Roman times. At that time, Ljubljana was called Amona. Okay, the next slide talks a little bit about the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And I would have Herta, who's just joined us, can probably give us a fast history of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but I'll save us some time. This is the boundaries of the empire varied from one time to another. But here you can see before the World War I started, World War I started in Sarajevo. You can see that the empire extended into Ukraine, into Romania, into Poland, to Czechoslovakia, and all the way over to the Swiss border at one time. It went down almost all the way to where the former Yugoslavia went, but did not hit southern Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia. We'll talk about those later. But you can see Slovenia was right in the middle of it. And a lot of the architecture, which you'll see, is reminiscent of it. Speaking of World War I, there was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, which took place in 1914, took place on this bridge. And that's lit the fuse for the beginning of World War I between, well, you can say many people were involved in it. From our perspective, and perhaps the perspective of the Yugoslavs at that time, it was a war between Nazism and fascism. And so this is Sarajevo. Now, Sarajevo is the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is the nation that is south, almost said republic. It once was a republic, now the nation south of Slovenia. Basically, interesting country in itself, as it has a Serbian influence, Croatian influence, Muslim influence, Catholic influence. Eastern Catholicism has a role down here, as opposed to Roman Catholicism, which is the mainstay in Slovenia and the northern part of Croatia. The next map is how things looked. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. How things looked in 1991 when the Yugoslav Federation broke up, and eventually each of the republics that are shown here, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia, became nations unto themselves. Each one took a little longer than some of the others, but eventually they all made it in. My next slide, I'm going to say a little bit about agriculture as it relates to Slovenia, because there's some not unique, there's some comparisons that could be made to Vermont. On this slide right here, this is a kozolec, or kozolc, as they would say in Slovene. This is uniquely Slovene. There may be a few in Austria and a few other places, but basically, if you see one of these, you can almost bet your life that you're in Slovenia. When I lived there, there were many more farms than there are now, but every farm had a kozolec, and this was for drying hay. They would just wrap the hay like you would on a clothesline over each of these things to dry it out. This one in particular is a fine example because you could do some other things with it, and you could park a car into some of these areas, and you can also stack wood. So it was an all-purpose building essentially. The next slide is an information slide about agricultural activity in Slovenia. I have used the comparison to Vermont. I will continue to do so. If you can see what's around here, this is the breakdown of the different kinds of agriculture in the country: cereals, forage plants, vegetables, horticulture, fruit, wine, cattle, milk, poultry, other animals, and so forth. 24% of the land area in Slovenia is in agriculture, 24%. Vermont's a little less than 21%, so it's pretty close. The amount of land that is dedicated to organic produce is about 9%, a little less than 9%. This was in 2015, and that placed it within the top 10 EU countries in terms of percentage of their farming that's in organic farming. Okay, I'm going to take a minute here. I'm going to stop in a second. In 2006, one of my trips over there, which I will talk a little bit more lately, my friend Gregor took me to a restaurant that he had been to 10 years earlier, which was out in the middle of nowhere, you could easily say. And it was just a beautiful outdoor restaurant. We were the only people there, and we took about 3 hours to eat. And when I turned around from there and looked to the south, here is the village, which is a typical Slovene village with the Catholic chapel on top of the village. This is we would call this a settlement in Slovene Naselje, which is just a settlement of could be a few houses or maybe up to 15 or 20 houses. And then most of this would be in farming, perhaps somebody in the services, and maybe even at that time, somebody who might commute to work someplace else. You can see looking south, and this is looking south, maybe all the way into northern Bosnia, I can't be sure, but you can see it's very wooded. For a country that's industrialized and has a lot of agriculture, it's like traveling in Western Massachusetts. You wonder if there's any people out there. They're all in the east. So I want to just stop here in case there are any questions that anybody has on what I've covered so far before I go on. Yes, start.
A couple of things. One, at the breakup of the Yugoslavia in the early 90s, of course, there was a lot of fighting, and we know about the genocide and ethnic cleansing that took place, particularly in Bosnia, to a certain extent in Croatia as well. But my impression is that Slovenia escaped largely most any violence. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Interesting that you bring that up. There was a 10-day war, they called it. The threat was, it's interesting because the Slovenes have their own language. It's Slovene. They all learn Serbo-Croatian because that was sort of the national language. If you went into the army or you did any work nationally in Yugoslavia, you had to learn Slovene. I mean, excuse me, Serbo-Croatian. And Serbo-Croatian is both Serbian and Croatian. The difference being the language is essentially the same, small differences. The major difference being Serbian is in Cyrillic and Croatian is in Roman letters. The Serbs, who were basically the Yugoslav National Army, tried to take over the borders of Slovenia. And there was some gunfire there. A few people were injured. They tried to take over the airport at Ljubljana, but they realized somehow that they weren't going to, that it wasn't worth it to fight for Slovenia because it was a different religion. They weren't Muslim or a lot of Muslims and Eastern Orthodox. They were basically Roman Catholics. They were oriented to the West. They were richer. You'd think they'd want to go for that, but I think they just figured it wasn't worth it to fight. So after 10 days, they gave up, and Slovenia escaped basically all of the horrors that went on in Bosnia and southern Croatia. Yeah.
Just one more thing. When you said that those pilings, those ancient pilings in what is now, or near what is now Ljubljana, that is, when you said it's UNESCO site, the term is World Heritage Site. And UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Social, and Cultural Organization, has gone around the world and identified sites that are of particular importance, both from a world perspective, both the cultural and a natural heritage. For example, right. In the United States, World Heritage sites, natural World Heritage sites would include Yellowstone and Grand Canyon National Park, and then a cultural site would be Gettysburg. But so it means it's recognized as something of extremely of importance for the whole world.
Yeah, and I'm going to show you another site before we're through. Yeah, you're right, and I appreciate the clarification. Anybody else with something they'd either like to comment on, a question?
Barry, I have a question.
Yes,
You you call the language Slovene. Well, all the while I grew up, we called it Slovenian. Are they both correct, or is there one that's more correct than the other? You know?
no, I would say that the language is Slovenian, you speak Slovene. That's how I would differentiate it. I guess Slovene, most of the people would say Slovenska, which would be Slovene. So I think it's you would say you're a Yugoslav, not a Yugoslavian. I think they usually use the shorter version in both
Okay.
of those cases. But you're not wrong if you say Slovenian for sure.
Thanks.
Okay, should I go on? I want to say a word about my experience in Slovenia, so you'll know what I know and especially what I don't know about. I was a graduate student at Cornell in the late 60s, and I was studying urban and regional planning. And after my first 2 years, and I was in the process of finishing up my my master's thesis, I was asked by my advisor, a fellow named Jack Fisher, if I wanted to become a project manager for something he was leading, which was the American Yugoslav Project in Urban Planning. And my wife at that time, Donna, and I thought about it for about 4 minutes and said yes. So we made our way over to Ljubljana. There's lots of interesting subplots there about coming into Yugoslavia. One, I'll take a little extra time. Sorry to go on, but there had been some people who had been the lead party into Slovenia for the project, Yugoslav American Project. And so the fellow who had been there came back and he was telling all these stories about being followed around the city of Ljubljana by special agents of Yugoslavia and Slovene and so forth. So we were a little apprehensive about going there. It wasn't saying that we wouldn't go, but we knew we should be on guard. And we were told that one of the things that you don't do going into Yugoslavia at that time was take pictures anywhere near a border. And so we had that clearly in our mind, and we bought a car in Munich. We flew to Munich, bought a car, a Volkswagen Squareback for $1,800, by the way, brand new. We drove through Austria. And in Austria, you climb the Julian Alps in your car, and when you get near the top, you go through a beautifully designed tunnel, and you come out the other side. And when you come out the other side, you're in Slovenia, and this countryside opens up, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So I said to my wife, I said, remember, we're not supposed to take any pictures here, but it's going to be hard not to. So we came up to the border guard, and he saw that we were Americans, and he said to us, "How would you like to take a picture?" So he was inviting us to take a picture. When we had read, we couldn't, and we said, "Okay, this is going to be downhill from now on," and it was. Anyway, I was there for a year. We did what we did. We had a few conferences, workshops we invited people to. Then I went back to Cornell, where I finished my coursework for my PhD and took my A exams, which are the exams you take before you start your dissertation. And then I was invited to go back a second year, which was very lucky for me. They were working on a regional study at that time. And so I was assigned to do some work on agriculture and housing. And then the second half of my period there, I was allowed to work on my dissertation. And I used the northeast corner of the metropolitan region of Ljubljana as my case study. And I basically was studying policies, not just in Slovenia, but other countries, particularly in Europe, where they were trying to encourage agricultural and rural areas, whether it was for national defense or was for having a local food supply, or whether it was to keep the things open for tourism in those areas, or just to keep people from going to the urban areas. There are a lot of interesting policies, and there still are on the books in Switzerland, Austria, and most of the European countries, including Slovenia. And I also did some population demographic work as part of that. In the 70s, I had a couple of short trips there to visit my friend Gregor and other folks. in 1989. Lynn and I got married in 83, so in 89, we traveled there. She had never been to Yugoslavia. So we went just before Yugoslavia broke up and spent our time, some time in Slovenia, basically at Lake Bled, and also in Croatia down on the coast there. And 17 years after that, I went over and spent a week or so with my friend Gregor. Just the two of us, we traveled around. Some of the slides you've seen and will see are slides that I took during that time. And just 2 years ago, Lynn and I again took a vacation. This time we went to Vienna in Austria, then we went to Ljubljana in Slovenia, then we went to the Sud Tyrol in Italy. And while we were in Ljubljana, we were hosted by Gregor and his wife Edie, who also, they live in Florida, but they also have an apartment in Ljubljana in a beautiful part of town. So that's my experience. And now I'm going to show you things, a little bit about Ljubljana. This is the Ljubljana Grad, Ljubljanska Grad, which means castle. And for those of you who have not been there, but have been to Salzburg, you'll see some resemblance of the castle on top of the hill. At the bottom is the old town of Ljubljana, the base here. And then that's surrounded by a river, the Ljubljanica River, which is a little canal or a big moat, if you will, that separates the old town from the rest of this area, was pretty new town. The next slide I have is actually a drone picture from above the castle looking to the southeast towards Croatia. And you can see this is a fairly massive area, this castle area, which has been rehabilitated over the last 30 or 40 years. It started even when I was living there. And now it's a place for conferences, for concerts, for museums, eating places. It's really a hub for tourism in the city. And you can get up there by, you can walk up, you can ride up in a car or a bus, or you can take the funicular, which we did. This is a fortress on one side of the cathedral. And once you're up there, you can look down upon the city. This is the newer part of the city. On the lower right-hand corner is a large Catholic church, the Central Catholic Church in Ljubljana. And the rest of this, you can see the architecture. This picture was taken just 2 years ago, so it's a little bit more modern dwellings. This building up in the upper right-hand corner certainly wasn't there when I was there in the 60s. Down in the bottom and right-hand side, where you see the flowering tree in front of the Catholic Church, is where this picture was taken toward. And what we have here is a bridge called the Tromostovje Bridge, which was done by an architect named Plečnik. And this, when I lived there, this was a very busy 3 bridges. And there were always cars and buses and trucks going back and forth between the old town and the new town. About 15 years ago, they started making all of these places pedestrian walkways. And boy, what a difference. Not only the air pollution and the noise, but now it's just a beautiful walkway. And it extends from the old town almost a mile through the center of town to Tivoli, which is a major park. Sorry, I don't have any pictures of it, but it's a beautiful park that takes up the northwest side of the city. If I turned around 90 degrees, I'd look at the town hall, which is in the old town, and the castle up above it. And I can remember when I first went over in '67, standing just about where this restaurant is, and having about 1,000 kids lined up along both sides of the street, waving Romanian flags, as Tito was hosting Ceausescu from Romania for a small meeting in town, and they went through town, and all the kids were waving Romanian flags. And then I have a couple of pictures, if I can get the control of my cursor here, of the Ljubljanica River, which is what I call the large moat around the old town of Ljubljana. There's another picture of it at another site. And then this is the farmer's market. This farmer's market was in play when I was there in the 60s. It still is. And you can see this is just one of the displays of flowers. Here's another one, and it looks to me like there's possibly Oh, yes, an attractive American tourist. Oh, my gosh, you know what? It's my wife. There she is. And so this is really a great market, I have to say. But you know, there are many wonderful open markets in Europe throughout. It's one of the delights of being in a European city. One of the specialties of this particular market, which is in play when we were there in 2019, was a new feature in which they served lunch on Fridays. And they would have people who came from restaurants, both in Ljubljana and outside Ljubljana, that would set up booths in the open market and every Friday. And hundreds of people would go up and down the lanes looking at the different booths and the kinds of food they had. It could be a main dish, could be dessert, could be drinks, whatever it was. And we would go through and pick out the things we thought we'd like to have. Then we went back and bought them. And then they had a whole series of picnic tables on the other side that you could go to and enjoy your food. And we happened to be there on a day which was sparkling clear and sunny. This gives you an idea, a little better picture of the kinds of food that were being offered by one of the vendors. And finally, finishing up in the old town, this is the street that goes from the right of the town hall. This is now a pedestrian walkway. And you can see this was very early in the morning. They haven't got their umbrellas up yet for outdoor restaurants, but these are mostly shops, antique shops, various kinds of shops, as well as restaurants in this area. And we were on our way over to see Gregor and Edie, who live in an apartment house, or have an apartment house there. And on the way, we came across this group of pupils from a little grammar school that were going on an outing of their own. And I love the jackets that they all had, all holding hands. So I'd like to stop there and just see if I picked up any questions. I don't want to get too far ahead of you, but if you have any, fine. If you don't, we can move on. In fact, I only see 6 people, so I think there are more people than I can see here. But anybody questions? Okay, all gone home. Okay, when in 2006, when I went to visit Grisha, it was the first time I had been in Ljubljana in some time, probably 2006 from then. It was over 15 to 16 years, maybe 17 years. So we went back to the old stomping grounds. Gregor and I, in 1967, lived in the same apartment house, but his door was about 100 feet down the street from mine. Talk about a Soviet architecture. This is what this was. And any resident had a sculpture done of him, and this is what this is. Somebody came along in 67 and did a sculpture of me. And so that demonstrates that I lived behind that particular door. Our favorite restaurant at that time was called the Zlatarog. Zlatarog was right across the street from us, so it was a hop, skip, and a jump. My favorite food, bar none, was Wiener Schnitzel, and they had their own variety of Wiener Schnitzel. So one day when my wife and I were over there, we were eating our meal, and I look across the way, and I see somebody that I recognize, but damn it if I could figure out who it was. So we talked about it, and my wife was no help at all. And finally it dawned on me, and for those of you who have been around seen more than one rodeo, you would know who this is. It was this fellow right here, who's Alan Hale, who played the captain on Gilligan's Island. And so he was there eating by himself. And so after the meal was over, I went over, introduced myself, and asked him if he wanted to come over to our apartment for a drink of wine or something afterwards. And he said yes. So we came over and we talked about why he was in Yugoslavia. He was doing a movie. And I didn't have the guts to ask him the obvious question of why didn't he bring Tina Louise, who played Ginger, along with him, but he didn't. This is if you remember the series, it was a silly, stupid program, but this is the professor on the left, and Tina Louise played Ginger, and of course, Alan Hale, who played the captain. Okay, so now we're going to move out of Ljubljana, and we're going to go up into the northern part of the country where Mount Triglav which is about 500 feet. This is the highest point in Slovenia, the highest point in the Julian Alps, which, as you remember, really splits the difference between Slovenia and Austria. I've never been up at the top. It's a hike to get there, I can tell you. The next picture is a scene from Kranjska Gora. Now, Kranjska Gora is a winter sports hub, which is in the Julian Alps. And this is a place where it's a world-class resort, winter resort. It's also where the Slovene Olympians train, and it's on Dart, help me out. It's on the tour for skiers, slalom skiers, Nordic skiers, as well as ski jumping. But also, it's not too shabby in the summertime, as you can see with the agricultural fields here and the mountains in the background, really very nice. And if you think that this is starting to look a little bit like Switzerland, you can go up to Velika Planina, which is a plateau up in the Julian Alps, which is for summer pasturing of cattle, just as you'd find in Austria or in Switzerland, with many, many cabins up there for the shepherds who are tending their way. Some of these cabins, by the way, have nothing to do with the pasture. They're just people who have built vacation places up there and enjoying it. Not pretty attractive. And speaking of agriculture, I've got a couple of pictures here of farm B&Bs. This has become very popular in Slovenia. It's been encouraged by the EU as well as by the Slovene government to encourage farmers to stay in business. They now get subsidies to make their properties available for overnight stays. And that's become very popular and really quite inexpensive. You can get a place for less than $100 a night. The next shot is of a town that has several B&Bs, and including a couple in which you don't have to stay overnight. You can just go for the day. So you arrive in the morning, you do some work, and then you get a free lunch, and then you get a drink in the afternoon, work some more, and then you go home. Another way to make money, another way to take advantage of the tourism value of farms. The next slide is another B&B. This one is up towards Maribor and the Austrian border north of it. And this one is right in the middle of the grape growing country. Slovenia has several of these. This area around Maribor is particularly thick with hops as well as with wine making. And all of these vineyards are tied by a trail, a wine trail that you can take and stop and guzzle a little sample at each of a number of vineyards along the way. Okay, now I'm going to go a little bit east from this back towards Ljubljana. I'm going to just show you two towns that were in my study area when I was doing my research. The first is Kamnik, which is in the foothills, as you can see, of the Julian Alps. And if you get a special day like this, which doesn't occur very often where it's that clear, I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. So Kamnik is a town that was probably had about 5,000 people when I was there. And the next town next to it, below it, is Domžale. And this is a picture from when I was there actually doing my study. Both towns were commuter towns into Ljubljana. They had commuter rail that went in, but they were also market towns for the agricultural area, pretty rural agricultural area to the east. And my study was to see how that eastern area was transforming from a very rural background or context with horses and very rundown houses in many cases, to places where you would see they've been storing bricks. Instead of putting money in the bank, they got bricks. And they would collect bricks until they had enough to put an addition onto their home. Then you travel a little closer and the road become paved. You'd see that there were tractors that are being used, and some of them had big combines that they used. So as you got closer to the urban area, you saw how the transformation was taking place, largely as a result of policies that were in play. Many of you have probably been to, certainly have heard of the Spanish riding school in Vienna. These are the famous Lipizzaner horses, and you can go there to the riding school and see the display of their expertise. All of these horses came from Lipica, which is in southwest Slovenia, where these horses are bred and you get their earliest training. And this is a stud farm, which is really an interesting site in and of itself in Western Slovenia. My last slides before I go on 2 trips is this of Koper. This is one of the Adriatic ports, and you definitely see the Italian influence here as opposed to the German. And this is the town of Piran, which has been described as sort of a classic Adriatic town, very strong Italian influence, very clustered development, but also a beautiful example of architecture. Okay, I'm going to move right along because I know I'm taking more time than I should. In 2006, when I went over to visit Grisha, he's the man on the left, we went up the Socha River Valley. Socha River Valley, if you remember, parallels the Italian border going north. And so there's a lot of influence of Italy in that point. In fact, part of this was in Italy for short periods of time during the war. We stopped well, we took a road off the main drag here, went up in the hills about 3 kilometers just to see what was there. And we met this fellow, 80-year-old man who was a farmer at that time. His farm was right to the right, we can't see it. And there was another farm off in the distance. And it made me think of the hill farms. It makes me think now of the hill farms in Peacham, where there's no flat ground at all, practically none, and yet they're making a living through subsidies. Slovenia, obviously, is a very small place, and yet, of course, I couldn't understand his Slovene because I didn't understand Slovene very well. I was being tutored in Serbo-Croatian, by the way. But Gregor knew both languages, and he came back to the car and he said, I didn't understand much he said either. Just over the hill, the dialects changed, just like the clocks were in a time zone. As we were driving around, this is the first time I saw a mobile beehive. And this was kind of an interesting sight for me to see in this valley. And the next picture here is a picture of what this valley looks like along the Socha River. This is foreboding. And this is an area in World War I where the Austrians and the Italians fought it out. We went to a little further north from this scene is a museum that we went to, which was a World War I museum. And I was so struck by the effects of chemical warfare and biological warfare, which is just beginning at that time, and what it did to the individuals who were there is unbelievable. And they fought a war in this terrain, and they had donkeys that would carry, which will pull cannons on wheels as their main either defense or offense. And to see that the area that they fought these battles in is just unbelievable to me. But anyway, this was one of the keys to this this particular valley. I'm going to skip the next, you've seen this slide before, not this slide, but this area before, and take you to another place on the western part of Slovenia and just describe the limestone area. Vermont has limestone, but nothing like Slovenia. Slovenia, the western part, has so much limestone, it's called karst, and it's led to 2 phenomena. One is the number of caves, and this is the most popular for tourists, the Postojna Caves, at a place that used to be a hotel, but it's now a museum of sorts. And they also leads to the sunken ground. In other words, limestone in the soil gives away, or it melts, not melts away, but it gets absorbed and the ground sinks. And so as you're walking around, or particularly driving, you're always going up and down hills, around corners. It's really a rugged drive, all because of the karst. And the final thing I'm going to show you here before my final series is Odečeč, which is a romantic resort, which is built on an island in the Krka River. The Krka River, by the way, that's spelled correctly. You don't want to waste vowels if you don't need to. This is a river that flows towards Zagreb. And this is a beautiful place to stay, beautiful place to eat. And we celebrated Dart's cousin's husband's 50th birthday there back in 2006. My last series, and I'll be quick about this, is another UNESCO site. And this one we were taken to in 2019, and this is called the Franja Partisan Hospital. Many of you probably know when I say partisan, partisans were sort of the local, if you will, guerrilla group that was sort of protecting the local population from both the Italian fascist regime and their army and the Nazis who were coming down from the north. And so the partisans led by Tito, who afterwards became president of Yugoslavia, he was their chief person. Well, the partisans fought in the woods so they could be protected. And they established hospitals throughout the rural areas, in this case of Slovenia. And they had these hospitals were there obviously to service the soldiers that were injured or wounded in war. But occasionally they would take in wounded enemy. When you see it, you get an idea how it is. In any case, it was a secret place. The Germans never found this. It was buried in a gorge, and you'll see a little bit of that gorge coming up. Food was brought in secretly by neighboring farmers. It was never discovered by the Germans, and the whole place was, or largely was destroyed in a flood in 2007. But fortunately, it was so popular a place that they had the complete design of each of the buildings that was there, and they completely rebuilt it, and it was designated this World Heritage Site in 2015. Now, this is the walkway that we walked down to get to that gorge. Just a beautiful walkway. This was probably a half a mile long. Anybody who was brought in here was blindfolded during the war. So they neither knew where they were, or how they got in, or how they would get out. And so this walk down, and when you got to the lower part of it, you got to a gorge, and I'll show a couple of pictures of that in a minute. The next slide shows a schematic. This is the gorge. We're coming in at the bottom over here, and we make our way up. Now we're walking in these days, you walk on very, very thin trails with water splashing all around, with the bridges that are metal, that you make your way up. It's not an easy walk by any stretch of the imagination. And these represent the different buildings. There was a hospital, there was an X-ray, there was examining rooms, there were operation rooms, there were infirmaries. There were also places that people slept in, both the staff and the people who were residents or who were patients in there. The next slide gives you, this is some of the buildings. These are all wooden buildings. They're very, very humble. It was like going away to camp in many respects. But of course now, because it's a site, everything was neat as a pin inside, and you get some idea. I just have a few pictures. There's that beautiful woman again. And you can see in the background underneath these buildings, the gorge, water is flowing underneath there. The next slide is a cartoon. One of this hospital's calling cards was that they believed that having fun, laughing, having music, and playing games was very therapeutic. So there was a cartoon done to demonstrate that. And again, I have a picture of this. I think it was an infirmary. No, sorry, it was the staff place the staff lived. And they had, I forgot to tell you, very important, this was run by a woman. Did I say that? There was a woman named Franja who was made the manager of this site, which was very unusual in those days. And there's a book that she wrote about this whole experience. But upstairs, where two of the nurses slept, this was it. That's great for your back. Anyways, that's how it looked in those days. And this final picture here. That day on our way back to Ljubljana, Gregor had driven us out there. We stopped in a town that was very familiar to me and very popular with me, Schofield Local. We stopped at a local restaurant where we had a dinner and desserts, and we looked kind of goonish there, but we were having a great time and also very tired. We finally made our way back to Ljubljana. In doing so, we passed through an agricultural area, and there we are, Kozolec, the final reminder of the Slovene countryside. You can see wood being stashed here at that time. So they are my dear friends, dear and patient friends, is what I have to say. And a little over my time, but if you've hung in there and you have some questions or comments, I'd be willing to entertain any of them.
Barry, can I say something? Can you hear me? This is Herta.
Oh, hi, Herta. How are you? I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. First I had you on the telephone because I couldn't get into this this
Oh, no.
website.
Oh, sorry.
But then I found it and then I turned off my telephone and I joined. But it was wonderful. Thank you so much. Really,
Oh.
I would love to hear it again. It was just so great.
Well, Herta, you may be one of the people who's been to Slovenia.
Pardon? No, I didn't hear you.
No, I said you may be one person who has been to Slovenia.
No, I have not.
Yeah,
I
no,
haven't.
okay.
I mean, for us, it was always Hungary, you know.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, this was perfect.
Well,
Wonderful.
well, thank you very much. If you missed the first part of it, I'll be glad to show it to you sometime.
Yeah. Oh, I would love it. Yeah.
Okay,
No,
great.
really. And your photographs are great. Really.
Well, I stole a couple, took many of them. But when you steal them, you only steal the ones where the sun is out and it's really beautiful.
Of course, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
Everybody does.
When you're traveling, you can't always order up a nice day.
No, that's right. No, but this was lovely.
Oh,
Thank you for
thanks.
doing
Thanks a
that.
lot.
And
Yeah.
Susan, thank you also for arranging it. Yeah.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Did many people speak English?
Oh, good question. I was going to mention that when I was there, this is really funny because I was living in Ljubljana. They had told me I should learn some German because people know German. I got there and I realized people didn't want to speak German at all.
No.
So my boss decided it would be best for me to learn Serbo-Croatian because if I traveled at all in Yugoslavia, other republics would not know Slovene, but they would know Serbo-Croatian. My wife was taught Slovene, and my friend Gregor taught both of us, one Slovene, the other Serbo-Croatian. When I went out in the 60s to shop, it was great for my language skills because nobody spoke English. So if I was going to get through, I had to use Serbo-Croatian, and sometimes it came through as Slovene because, well, there's a lot of stories about how I picked up Slovene with some of Gregor's friends, but I won't get into that right now. But in any case, I would go to a newsstand to pick up a newspaper, and I remember the guy saying, "By the way, are you Polish or are you Czech? Are you not Russian? Are you?" They knew that it was not Slovene. They knew it was Slavic, but they didn't know enough about those other languages to know just exactly what a guy from Boston was speaking if he was there. Now, Nancy, if you travel there and you go on the pedestrian way, you can't stop at a shop that doesn't have everybody speaking English.
Mhm.
And they speak other languages as well. I'm sure they would speak German and Italian or do a good job of English. Is very, very popular now. Not because they're excited about the United States or English. That's because there's so many people who speak English. It's really the common language now.
Yeah.
Yes, Dart.
Yeah, I saw English on one of the tents in the farmers market.
Yeah.
So I suspect it's a popular language now,
Yeah, it is.
and particularly among the educated and the youth.
Yeah.
How has Slovenia done under the pandemic?
They
You know?
started off very well. It was sort of like Vermont in the early going. Everyone around them was having a very tough time. And then all of a sudden reality hit. And they've had a really tough time the last 4 or 5 months. I think they're coming out of it now, but they've had a tough time. And it's interesting because one of the things that Ljubljana is noted for are the medical facilities. And I know that the people there are really proud of that, but I don't know what happened. Perhaps they were a little more relaxed than they ought to be, a little more cavalier, because seemed that they were avoiding it, but they've had a tough time, like Sweden. Sweden has had a very tough time, in one of the few places you'd think it wouldn't happen.
Barry, very nice, thank you. Is there much areas for walking or hiking and the kind?
Yeah, well, this is one of the disappointments to Lynn, is our friends Gregor and Edie are not walkers. So they weren't keyed into the newer places that have been opened up. It's not quite like England or Switzerland, where you can just take off and there are lots of public paths. There are some, but I can tell you the more popular thing is hiking. And I differentiate walking this way as opposed to hiking, which is this way. And as I get more mature, so we say, I favor the walking. And so there's not so much of that as you'd find in other countries.
Mhm. Okay.
But having said that, Jeff, if you went up to Velika Planina, where those cows were, there's plenty of walking trails there.
Right.
And you just have to get up there. You could probably drive or you could walk. It's not overly burdensome, but and if you were in the rural areas anywhere, you could walk along the roads and be safe because there's not that much traffic. But it's certainly not laid out in the same way that other countries are. Dart?
I don't know if you mentioned this, but what is the form of government? Is it parliamentary system?
It's a democracy. They do have I guess you would call it a parliament. It's a multi-party system. They have the Greenies, they have the Agricultural Party, which is a very conservative one. They have the Christian Democrats, which almost every country has had at one time or another. So right now it's a fairly conservative government, and I think Gregor told me. And when they first started, they had trouble because there were so many conservative. It was difficult for them to get away from, I don't want to say from a communist regime, because that was not necessarily that popular. But like in Russia, they're so used to having a government play a larger role that they don't have much experience with a situation in which you don't have it. But the best thing that happened to Ljubljana was to have a very outgoing mayor about 20 years ago, who was around for some time. I don't think he's still mayor, but he had some very progressive ideas about what Slovenia could do to make it more attractive as a tourist destination and just open it up. So the whole idea of the pedestrian mall and introducing some of the things that they did to improve the language skills of folks were introduced by this guy. And so you have in Yugoslavia, you have sort of, excuse me, in Slovenia, you have a sort of a government that's not this different of what we have, perhaps a little bit more like the British Parliament, but not quite as stiff with the House of Lords and so forth. But it's a multi-party system, and who's ever in charge, it only needs to get 50% of the vote, and then you're in charge. And so often what happens, if you want to challenge somebody who's in the office, sometimes you form a coalition with somebody from another party, and you somehow try to get an election called. And if you win, then your coalition takes over, if it can stay together. So it's a definitely a European brand of democracy.
Same in Germany, yeah. Mhm.
Is there much legacy of the worker cooperatives and worker management that you were looking at that time?
I don't know. I can't answer that question precisely, Jeff. The system that was in play before was sort of half socialist and half private, because you could have a private operation if you kept it small. Now there's no restrictions. And so you have large companies, you have cooperatives, but that's largely, the cooperatives are largely in the agricultural sector, where you have a number of apple growers that work together, or vineyard owners that would work together. That would be the closest thing, I think, to what the old workers, I'm trying to think of what they would have called themselves, self-management units. There's a name that escapes my mind now. I think that in most cases, a lot of the restaurants are still private, but they can have more than 10 employees. Hotels would be the same thing. Many of those would be private. So I don't think you're going to see an awful lot of publicly owned enterprises, as we might call them. They would be primarily in the utilities, transportation, bus company. I think the bus company is probably not a public. It's probably, I take that back, it probably is public, but they probably have some form of management within the organization.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I thank you all for
Thank
sticking
you.
with it.
This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Barry.
you. It's a beautiful place that I knew nothing about.
Thanks, Barry. That was nice. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah. Oh, Dina, is that Dina?
Yeah.
Dina. Oh, where'd she go? I have a picture I want to show her.
Yeah, she's on, she's, I see her name, so she must be on.
Yeah.
I'll tell her sometime. I'll show her the place that her great grandparents were from. She told me that probably didn't exist because it was obliterated by the Nazis. And I said, no, I think there'll probably be something there. It's really a small scale agricultural area in the southeast part of Slovenia, a place that I had never been to. My friend Gregor had never been to either. Dragatush is the name. And her great grandmother, I guess it was from a comparable town about 15 miles further north. And these places went through hell during the war, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Barry. Good job.
Thank
Yes.
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you very
Barry.
much, Barry, for sharing this with us. It's been a really
Susan,
great
thank you for
program.
asking. I enjoyed it.
When you
I just
organize a
did that.
trip there, let us know and we'll join.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I have to, we didn't ask, I didn't say very much about the food. I thought the food was really quite excellent. As I intimated, there's a lot of Austrian influence. When they do an Wiener Schnitzel, they do it up big. A Wiener Schnitzel that you would have in Vienna would be about that thick. It would be pounded, boom, 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 boom. The veal would be down. And often you can't get veal anymore. It's going to be a pork chop that's around some ham. The Zrezek, which they call it Ljubljanski Zrezek, which was a Wiener Schnitzel by another name, was about that thick. And it had, it could either have chicken or ham, as well as veal and cheese. And that with a side of French fries and a pivo, which is a cold beer, would have been perfect. That was my favorite meal.
Sounds good.
What about dessert? What kind of desserts did they have?
Okay, good. I would say this is again Germanic. A lot of things that you would see with cream desserts and what we would call a pudding, or a layer with pudding and chocolate, and not overly sweet, but sweet enough to be really tempting. Strudels, things of that nature. Cakes or torts would be big, but this is all Germanic oriented.
But
What
Barry,
about
what was that
pizza?
pancake that I had?
Yeah, Petitza.
Oh, petitza. Yeah, what was petitza? Do you remember?
Petitza is nuts and raisins rolled up in a
Yeah.
Oh, like a
in a bread.
Yeah, see, I don't put nuts in my dessert, Dina, so I know it's a very popular dessert there. I know it, I just haven't done it myself.
It's palacinta. If you roll it up, it's like it's a very thin pancake. You roll it
Yes.
up and inside, yeah, it's palacinta.
Oh, that's a palatchinka, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
now you're talking. Now the palatchinkas, you could have any kind of fruit or perhaps
Yes, you can have
chocolate sauce or
chocolate,
something like that.
Chocolate sauce, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And a palatchinka, that's a Slavic name for it, actually.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So my mouth is watering.
Yes,
Wow.
yes, me too. Thank you, Barry. Yeah, okay.
Okay, well, thank you all. I really appreciate you.
Right, I think we could be asking you questions all night because it's
You
so
soon
interesting.
you would not get answers.
But, well, thank you for going overtime because
Yeah.
it was a bonus.
Yeah,
Okay, great. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you around town.
thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Barry.
you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Okay.
Night.
Bye, everybody.
Right, thanks, Susan.
You're welcome. Thanks for
thanks,
stopping in. Okay, I am going to end the Zoom call.
Okay, I should be able to get out of it myself, but I haven't found out how to do it.
Well, you'll be put out of it by me.
All right, me too.
Good
Thanks
night.
again.
Thanks again.